Hello and welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Verelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple. We have an exciting interview coming up with a very special guest after a few quick updates. Since 2010, we've contributed over $3 million in counting to pancreatic cancer research efforts. We've also allocated $1 million worth of aid to more than 1,300 patients and families through our patient aid programs. Your monthly or one-time gift can improve patients' lives through research and assistance programs. You can donate now at projectpurple.org. Pancreatic cancer does not rest, and neither will we. Your support is truly appreciated. If you're looking to get involved in one of our many events, whether that means joining a run team, running a virtual run walk, group fitness, golf, or anything else you can think of, visit projectpurple.org/events to learn more. Without further ado, let's meet our special guest coming to us all the way from, it's usually sunny and warm. I know today, as we record this, the weather's not too great, but South Carolina, Holly Shawyer. Did I pronounce that correct, Holly?
Yes, you got it.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us here on the Project Purple podcast. I know, as I said, as we're recording, you've got, I think it's, now it's tropical storm. I think it got downgraded, right?
I think so, yeah.
Is it Debbie, I think?
Debbie.
Hopefully you're safe and sound there as it passes through South Carolina. And, you guys get through it without as your cat jumps in there. So
She's trying real hard. She gets real jealous.
That's all right. We've had many special guests on the Project Purple podcast through the years. Believe me, it's all good. But be safe and sound, and hopefully Tropical Storm Debbie doesn't hit South Carolina too hard.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for taking the time to join us here on the podcast. As I mentioned before we hit record, the first segment's always our guest opportunity to kind of share their background with our audience. As I said, hopefully your friends and family will listen to this and watch this, but many people in our community don't know your story. So this is your opportunity to kind of share with them your story. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, and the microphone is yours, as we say.
All right. So my name is Holly, and I currently live in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm from Maryland originally, and I'm a teacher. So I moved down here 2 years ago just because I honestly was sick of the cold. It wasn't an easy decision because I'm very close with my family, and they're all located in Maryland. But it just wasn't somewhere I saw myself putting roots down. So I had been to Charleston quite a few times and just decided to make the jump. I only knew one person moving down here, so it was a little scary at first. And then it was kind of crazy because everything with my health went haywire not even a year into living here. So it was May of 2023. I had woken up in the middle of the night. I had like stabbing pain in my left abdomen. And it subsided by the morning. So it was like, okay, like, I don't know what that was. Weird cramp, you never know. Something I ate bothering me. And then I was at school that Tuesday and it happened again. And it was to the point that like even breathing like was painful, just like the contraction of my abdominal muscles from taking a breath. So I went to the ER. And the crazy thing was like I had radiating like shoulder pain at the same time. And of course, I think we're all guilty of doing this where you have symptoms, so you Google them. So all of my symptoms kind of aligned with like a stomach ulcer, but the shoulder pain was listed as like a symptom of a rupturing ulcer. And it was like, if that's the case, it requires like emergency surgery. So it's like, well, I should mention this because, if I need surgery, you got to get it. But of course, because I had shoulder pain, especially left shoulder pain, the ER was concerned about my heart. So the ER did a lot of scans on my heart. They weren't as concerned about my abdomen. And after about 5 hours there, they were like, well, CT's really backed up. They're like, it really just sounds like a stomach ulcer. They're like, we're going to have you follow up with a GI specialist. And they prescribed me like meds for a stomach ulcer. So I was like, okay. And by the time I left the ER, the pain had kind of subsided. And I'll be honest, at first, I wasn't even going to follow up with the GI specialist just because being a teacher and my insurance isn't like the greatest here.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little spoiled in Maryland with my insurance, and I took a big pay cut to move down here. So financially, I was like, I'm going to save myself a couple $100s and like not go to the GI specialist if like I have these prescriptions that'll take care of this. And then thank God, 2 weeks later, it wasn't as bad of a pain, but like I had pain show up again. And I was like, okay, like this isn't normal. So I'm going to call the GI specialist. So I went, they had me they tested for H. pylori, which is the bacteria that's present if you have a stomach ulcer. And when I tested negative for that, they ordered a CT. So it was about 6 weeks from the time I actually went to the ER to like having a CAT scan. And when I had a CAT scan, that's when they found it was like a baseball sized cyst on the tail of my pancreas. Um, so I was like, okay, that explains why I was in so much pain because that's like the size of some of your organs. Um, and so everything appeared benign. So I was not worried about it at first. The GI specialist was like, just lower your fat intake. He's like, avoid alcohol, just like kind of gave me dietary restrictions. And he said, we'll follow up with an MRI in September to see if it's like shrunk or if anything's changed. He said, usually these like resolve on their own over time. So I went back for my MRI. And it had, because it was 10 centimeters when I had my CAT scan. And when I went for my MRI, it had shrunk to 9 centimeters, but there was a presence of a nodule that showed up on the MRI. And that's when they were like, well, this could potentially be like a precancerous cyst. And so backtracking, I like to read, and I knew nothing about pancreatic cancer. My grandmother had like something show up in a colonoscopy once, but they caught that super early. She never had to go through chemo or anything. So that's really my only experience in terms of my family with cancer. But I had read a book, and it's fictional, like romance book, in June called The Love Hypothesis. And ironically, the main female character, she was a research scientist researching ways to detect pancreatic cancer early because she had lost her mom to it at a young age because it's so hard to detect. And a lot of people don't find it till later stages and usually till it's too late to treat. And I had read that book literally a week before I found out I had a cyst. So when the word precancerous was said to me, again, my everything about my cyst still appeared benign. So my GI specialist was like, well, we'll follow up with an endoscopic ultrasound in 3 months. And I said, no. And I told him, I was like, I'm not comfortable with that timeline. One, my pain, it wasn't like present all the time. It would come and go. Sometimes I'd go weeks without any pain. Sometimes it was like the stabbing pain that I had initially. Sometimes it just felt like a dull cramp. But it was like coming and going. And I mentioned before we started recording that I'm a runner, and I was actually training for a local marathon here at the time. So whenever I would have flare-ups, as I would call them, with the pain, like I couldn't run. I like walking was painful. So I was like, I was like, this is affecting like my quality of life. I was like, so I'm not comfortable waiting 3 months and like being expected to live like this. And I said two, and I probably sounded dumb, but I believe in like advocating for yourself. I was like, I read this book. I was like, so I happen to know like how aggressive pancreatic cancer is and how hard it is to detect. So like when you're telling me I possibly have a precancerous cyst on my pancreas, like I'm not comfortable waiting 3 months to like find out more information. And thankfully, like my doctor was willing to like listen to me and work with me. So they were able to get me in for an endoscopic ultrasound a month later in October. When I had that done, just initially talking to the surgeon after that, he had told me, he was like, the cyst is going to have to come out. He said, still, even then, he said, everything appears benign. They couldn't reach the nodule in my endoscopic ultrasound to biopsy it because it was too far away. But he said everything appeared benign. He wasn't worried about cancer, but he said they could drain it, but it would fill back up. And essentially, I was going to have pain as long as it stayed in my body. So I was going to have it surgically removed. So a week later, I met with the surgeon for a consult for my actual surgery. And by that time, he had ordered tumor marker blood work for CA19 and CEA. So I had that done that day. When those came back, my CA19 levels came back elevated. I want to say normal is like 0 to 38, and mine was 222. Um, and my CEA and my blood work was normal, but the next day, the CEA from the fluid inside my cyst came back, and it was like in the 5,000s. So at this point, again, because of like the appearance in all of my scans, even my surgeon, he was like, there's like a 33% chance it's cancer. He is like, I can't guarantee you it's not. He's like, but I literally like remove, these kinds of cancerous tumors for a living. Like it doesn't appear to be cancer, but like we can't say that it's not. So I had a distal pancreatectomy and splenectomy in December. And for those who don't know, they took the tail of my pancreas, my spleen, and then the cyst along with it. And that was December 12th. And December 15th, which was the day I was getting discharged from the hospital, my surgeon came in that morning and told me that when they biopsied my cyst, they did indeed find cancer. I'm someone who I like to like mentally prepare myself for all scenarios. Just so that I'm like, I mean, I'm a positive person. I wanted to believe it wasn't going to be cancer, but I also didn't want to be like freaking out. I had my freak out moment when they told me pre-cancer in September. I had a whole day at work where I like sobbed all day. Like our school psych was like, "Are you okay?" I was like, I am. I was like, just potentially bad news. But going into surgery, I had mentally prepared myself for anywhere from like, it's a miracle, it's gone, to you have 6 months to live. Just so I could like kind of have what I thought would be a plan in place. I knew like I would still have to process like emotions in the time, but he told me, he was like, it's best case scenario for worst case scenario is what he said. He was like, I can't even tell you when I've diagnosed someone with stage 1 pancreatic cancer. He's like, because it's such a rare diagnosis. He's like, so yes, while getting a cancer diagnosis is worst case scenario, this is like the best diagnosis you could get for a cancer diagnosis. So because I'm 35, so he's like, you're young. He's like, he's like, I'm going to get you a consult with the oncologist. And he's like, if they recommend chemo, like you should take it. He is like, because your body will handle it. He's like, you'll bounce back. And it's the best chance to make sure that if there's any lingering cancer cells that like weren't inside the cyst or anything we missed, that those are killed. And basically like to prevent reoccurrence. So I went through 6 months of chemotherapy. I started in January. I just finished at the end of June. I was on FOLFIRINOX, which is oxaliplatin, oxaliplatin, 5-FU, and what was my other one? I hated the other one. I should remember what a Renotecan. That one literally made me like so nauseous in the chair. It was it was awful. So I finished chemotherapy in June, and then on July 19th, I had my scans and they came back clear. So as of now, I'm in remission. Still experiencing some side effects. My particular chemo, which I'm sure if a lot of people in the pancreatic cancer community have had, like it doesn't cause complete hair loss, but like my hair is still like shedding at like obscene amounts compared to what's normal. I have like nerve issues with my hands and feet still, from the oxaliplatin. So it's like an interesting place to be, because something I think that's not talked about enough. And I know I would have been the same way because, like I said, I've never had anyone in my life who had cancer. And I feel like most people, if you haven't known someone or been through it yourself, most people's experience is like what you see on TV. Like the number of people who were like, you're not bald, because that was just the assumption. The fact that I was able, which I attribute this to, I was marathon trained. Like I ran 20 miles like 3 weeks before I had surgery. My marathon was supposed to be 3 days before surgery, and I had to drop out the day of because I was having a flare up and I was in so much pain. I remember that morning I had woken up and I like attempted to like go for like a little run just to see if it was even worth my time driving down to my marathon. And like 45 seconds in, I was in excruciating pain and I was devastated because marathon training is a commitment. That was like 6 months of my life that I had worked really hard for. But I feel like going into surgery and chemotherapy, having my body prepared for that, like helped me bounce back a lot better between rounds of treatment. But I think a lot of people who don't have any experience with anyone with cancer, it's like, oh, like you're done with chemo, like you're cancer free, like yay, like life's back to normal. Um, and for me, I'm like, I feel like I can't even start like emotionally or like mentally like healing because I'm still having like outside of fatigue and nausea, all the same side effects. Like someone asked me, they're like, how's post-cancer life? I was like, I'll let you know when I feel like I'm there. um, so, it's just, and I think that's something that needs to be talked about more just for people who have someone in their life who, I mean, I have a great support system. It was not easy living 8.5 hours from like my family and everywhere I had called home. My parents came down once a month for my treatments because my treatments were every other week.
Mhm.
And my dad's a pastor, so realistically, he couldn't take off like every other Sunday to be here, or I know they would have. But I have a really great support system. But it's just I'm like at a point where I'm like, okay, like this is going to last. The effects of this are going to last like a lot longer than I'm realizing. And just trying to learn how to like navigate the mental and emotional aspect of it all post treatment and post cancer.
Wow. That is a pretty amazing story, Holly. You threw in your age there, which I was going to ask at some point. And so I typically don't do research on our guests. So just being 100% transparent here, when we started this call, I was like, oh, maybe she's one of our runners. That you mentioned runner, and I was like, I'm kind of taken back that that you've gone through this experience because of your age. I mean, we have interviewed young people. I do think that there's this is something I've been doing now going on 15 years. I mean, it's not an old person's disease. And so I guess the first question here, and I know I love that example about the book. And so I have a good friend who's an author. She's written quite a few books actually. Um, and I was told when they ever want to like when Hollywood, if you ever notice, and this is bad, but like this is the truth, like in books or in Hollywood, whenever they want to like off people really quick, the disease they use is pancreatic cancer because of the statistics, right? So it's fascinating, like that tidbit. And she told me this. She's like, yeah, that's like a thing in the industry, like in movies and in scripts and in writing. If there's a sudden death to happen, pancreatic cancer is used typically what they use. But when you said like, hey, I read this book and this researcher, about losing her mom at a young age, and that was like I wouldn't say the light bulb because I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but like, when the doctor comes back and it's like, yeah, there's this thing on your pancreas, but yeah, don't worry about it. Part of me like I got chills hearing you tell that story, but then also like I get really angry as an advocate because like here we are in 2024 and like and I get it. I mean, I guess you can't like from a physician standpoint, like they can't go in and do these types of procedures on everyone and they do see them every day. So part of me wants to say that, right? But excuse me, the other part is like yeah, we've got to have further discovery. Like, and this is where early detection and self-advocacy to, like you said, you became a strong self-advocate to say, like, no, I want to get an EUS a lot sooner than 3 months because, this thing's like brewing here, it looks like. And, so it's just so powerful, like what you were saying about your story. First question here, you mentioned self-advocacy. Is that something that's always kind of been part of your DNA? Or, was that something like fight, people often like fight or flight, right? Like it's like you're in that moment and you're like your back's against the wall and you gotta be the self-advocate or else like the system just kind of takes you over.
I've definitely since like childhood been very like outspoken, never had an issue like speaking my mind. I know I usually say like sometimes I'm like, sometimes like I always say it's like the fourth sentence that went through my mind is what comes out of my mouth. Cause sometimes, our initial reaction isn't always great. And I'm like, I know how to be professional and respectful in like the things I say, even if my initial response is like, you got me fired up. But I had a speech impediment as a kid, and my mom loves to tell this story. I was 5 and getting to go into kindergarten, and my mom was like, honey, like we got to work on your speech, or otherwise you're going to have to like be in speech therapy when you go to school. And I put my hands on my hips and said, well, I'll just speak Spanish. Bilingual, but I don't come from a Hispanic family. I've taken 5 years. I'm okay in Spanish, but that was like later in life. But like little 5-year-old me was just like, well, I'll just speak another language, like if I can't speak English correctly. So I've always been someone who's been outspoken and willing to stand up for myself when need be. And this was just a situation where, like I said, I just was like, I'm not comfortable. I was like 3 months. I had again Googled things, and I had read where like pancreatic cancer can go from stage 1 to stage 4 within a year. So once pre-cancer was thrown out and I started to like do a little bit more research on pancreatic cancer, I was just like, oh no, absolutely, absolutely not. And it's one of those things where it's hard because one, all of my medical knowledge is from watching Grey's Anatomy. So like I don't know anything, but it's like, I respect, like you all went to school for so many years, like as an educator, like I have so much respect for like the work they've put in. And it's like, no, doctors aren't going to get it right, like every single time. And I know like they also have to kind of like protect themselves, because you don't want to order unnecessary tests and do all these unnecessary things, because then that could lead to lawsuits on their part. So it's like, they have to go with what they see and what they know. But for me, and that's been like a big part of my story as well. So I feel like I'm too old to be doing what I'm about to say, but I had started, I've always loved running. I played basketball in high school. That's kind of like where it started. But I've like come in and out of running a lot over the years, just because living in Maryland, like winters are freezing, summers are hot. So I pretty much would only run in the fall and spring, and I'd like quit all the time. So when I had moved to Charleston, I had started running again in the fall of 2022. And I was like, I'm going to sign up for a half marathon so that like I can't quit during the winter, which like turns out Charleston winters are so nice. That would have been irrelevant anyways. But I had started posting about my running on TikTok, because it was like, no one knows me on this app. I was like, I'm not going to post about my running on like Facebook or Instagram where like people know me, like, because nobody cares that I'm running, but like just as a way to keep myself accountable. I was like, I have 2 friends on here that know like my 2 best friends from college, and like that's it. And people started like following me, and I don't really know why. Probably because I'm not a very fast runner. Like I'm an average runner, like by all standards. But it was like, oh, like no, like you don't have to be a fast runner to like run races. Like that was like my whole memo. And I did a half marathon, and it was great. So then summer was coming, and Charleston summers, if you've never been here, are brutal. It is so hot and so humid. So it's like, well, I'm going to sign up for a full marathon, because I've already determined it doesn't, like I knew I could not run during the summer and start running again in the fall and be good for another half. So it's like, I'm going to sign up for a full marathon, and that's going to be my way to keep myself accountable. My chemo brain is like triggering right now. I'm trying to remember why I was even bringing this up. Why did I start talking about
Well, you said you went to TikTok because like,
TikTok.
that's
Yes,
so different.
thank you. Yeah, that was literally my
In your age, you brought up your age too, so you're like using
um,
TikTok. Yeah, like TikTok's like that. Are you old enough to be on TikTok?
oh yeah. No, I was like, I am I too old to be here? Am I too old to be doing this? But so I started posting about like marathon training, and again, like people like started following, and I was like, I don't know why so many of you are following me, but like that's cool. Because it was the cool thing about TikTok is I feel like it's so easy to connect with people based on like whatever it is you're doing, what you're into. So I have this like community of like runners that I've like become friends with that I've never met in real life, online. And then I got diagnosed with cancer, and it was cool because I had all these like running friends that then like came alongside like supporting me through that. But then a big part, I was like, okay, obviously I'm not going to be like running. I did run through the majority of treatment. My feet have started to go numb a little from the neuropathy, so I have not been running the way I like to. But I was like, I'm going to share about my cancer journey because I consider myself a strong person, and I was just like, I just like felt like I was supposed to share about my journey. And a big part of that is that I've been talking about like the importance of like self-advocacy with your healthcare because of pancreatic cancer being so hard to diagnose. And I believe in God, so I'm like I'm so grateful that I got diagnosed early, but I know that that's not the case for so many people. So it's like if sharing my story and putting it all out there even helps like one person find their pancreatic cancer before it's too late, then I feel like I've done something right with putting it all out there. And it's not easy because if you know me personally, I'm a very private person. I'm not like a put my life out on social media. Like even like when I moved to Charleston, I literally just like posted a picture and I was like, I live here now. Like outside my like close friends and family, and obviously like my work, like I never announced that I was like moving. I'm just hard launching, I guess is what they call it. But I'm just like oh, like I just post things as they happen, but I'm not like the most active on social media. So if you look at like my Instagram and Facebook versus like my TikTok, it's very different because I'm very transparent and open on TikTok. But it's like I said again, if it even helps one person,
Yeah.
then that's enough for me, and I feel like I'm doing something right.
Um, I want to go back to the very, very, very beginning. And you said some stuff here about running, and that, and we're going to talk about that in a bit here. But I tend to think like, especially like when if those listening, and I'm not like, how do I put this? Like runners, like if you're training for a marathon and if you run a marathon, like runners tend to know their bodies really, really well. And you don't have to be, and what I was going to say with this is like, you don't have to be like, clearly the Olympics are going on right now. And the Olympic marathon happens, I think, this weekend or maybe next weekend. It's usually at the very end, but you don't have to be at that performance level to know like something's up. But like if you're training for these marathons, right? Like as you said, like, whether it's, the training and your feet, the stamina, your stomach. In hindsight's always 2020, but if you look back, well, maybe you have done this, Holly, and this is kind of a loaded, I have this term loaded question. This is a loaded question, meaning there's no right or wrong, but it's kind of like the thought-provoking ones. But can you look back even before moving down to Charleston, like that there were like these little blips on the radar? Because like as you said, like science does, and there's somewhat of an argument out there with science. Let me just say this. My question is, if you look back, was there like 5 years ago where you had this like GI episode or you had this pain, but you were working out or maybe like stress or whatever it may be? And part what I was going to say is like, there's this argument in science, like you said, you went out on the internet and, like stage 1 can become stage 4 within a year, which I've seen that. I've also read data where, these tumors, are there for like up to 10 years until they actually present symptoms, right? Which is kind of scary, right? To think like you were walking around, like you may have been walking around for who knows how long, with this cyst just growing slowly. And we do know with cysts, like not all of them, but a fair percentage of them do become cancerous, right? So do you look back, or have you looked back, I should say, over your lifetime and go, oh, now I know why maybe I was experiencing this at 21, when I graduated or when we graduated high school or we're in college or, wherever you were at that point in time. So has that thought ever crossed your mind?
Oh, absolutely. So ironically, I'm someone who doesn't get sick that often. I go to like regular doctor's appointments, but like outside of like annual appointments, my doctors don't see me very often. My friends always joke, they're like, you are like the healthy, like, they're like, of all the people I know for this to happen to, they're like, you, and maybe it's like being a teacher and working in an elementary school. I think I have a good immune system. But it's
You get a
like,
lot of germs.
oh yeah, I've
Teaching in
never had
school.
the flu in 35 years, never had the flu, never got COVID. But my friends always joke, they're like, you just have like weird medical things that happen to you. Like I've had to have like a gum graft done and it like didn't heal correctly. So I had to have it done like again when my wisdom teeth were removed. I didn't get like dry sockets like normal people. I had this like abscess form in my cheek and my face looked like it had a like softball in it. So my friends always joke, they're like, you just have like extreme medical things. Like normal people illnesses, like no, like you're good. So looking back, I never really had GI issues. However, because I thought back, like I was like, did I ever have like symptoms of anything? And I distinctly remember I also love to travel. And I had gone to Australia for my spring break in 2023. And my best friend and I were on our way back. We're sitting in LAX. And I had said to her, and I think this is why I remember it because I actually had a conversation about it. But I had said to her, I was like, I'm having like a really like weird like pain in my left side. I was like, it's just like a dull ache, but it's like ever present. And I am someone who like I drink like 100+ ounces of water a day in like daily life, but when I travel, I'm probably like dehydrated compared to my norm because if you've ever traveled, especially in foreign countries, there are not like public restrooms to use whenever you need one. And so my solution to that is I just like don't drink while I'm out and about during the day. I like drink a lot in the morning and I drink a lot when I get back to the hotel. And other than that, I'm pretty much dehydrated the rest of the day. So my best friend had said, she was like, oh, it's probably just like your kidney because you like haven't drank as much water as like you're used to. Like, and I was like, oh yeah, you're like probably right. So, I just like chugged a bunch of water when I got home and then, it went away. But now looking back on it, I'm like, that was 100% my cyst. Like, had to be same like location, same pain in terms of like when I had like dollar flare ups. And even my surgeon had said, he was like, for your cyst to have been the size that it was, he's like, this has been like probably growing in your body for like many, many years. And I'm like, that's so scary, like so scary to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, hindsight's always 2020, right? And that's not the purpose of that question is not to beat yourself up, but it's just
Yeah.
fascinating, because I mean, it's fascinating, but it's also frustrating, I guess, from an advocacy standpoint. And I'm sure, maybe you'd have the same sentiment as a patient advocate, who's gone through it is like, like no one can really tell you, right? Just like the guy, like, and I'm not throwing the clinician under the table or anything, but he's like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. But like, no, wait a minute, it is a big deal, right? Like it's my body,
Oh, yeah.
like, and I think that's where, you're a testament of, early diagnosis, as freaky as this was. The earlier that we get these cancers, the success rates and the survivability and quality of life all go up tremendously. And that's where we really, our community as a whole and, the pancreatic cancer community as a whole has really been pushing early detection. And I think, there's even some, including ourselves, where we go even a step further and like prevention. Like, how do we prevent a lot of these cancers, right? Like, and I think that's like the next step. But, it's fascinating, to hear your story, Holly. Um, Another question that I have for you, I know you mentioned so cancer, like there's no family history of any cancer in your family at all.
Other than, like I said, my grandmother during like a colonoscopy, they found like a little cancer, but
Yeah.
she never had to, they were able to remove it. She never had to go through chemotherapy. Um, Outside of that, I think like there's been some like skin cancer. I mean, even I have like a scar on my forehead from like a pre-cancerous,
Yeah. Like
which
a
back to
melanoma.
yeah, back to Grey's Anatomy. I've always been hyper aware of like any like freckles or anything on my body because one of the characters in Grey's like had stage 4 like melanoma, and it was like from that had spread to like all her organs that was from like a freckle that on her back that she just didn't notice. So I've always been very diligent about the dermatologist because of that. But outside of that, no, like no, especially like GI, like no, no history, especially pancreatic.
So being your age, did they talk to you about genetics? Did they do full genetic screening and everything?
They did. I tested positive for KRAS, KRAS. I'm assuming that's
Yeah.
how it's pronounced.
KRAS, yeah. So it
Yeah,
was a KRAS mutation.
Yes, I tested positive for that gene mutation, but then that was really the only concerning result from my test. I tested negative for,
All
I
the
think,
other
all the
known
others.
suspects.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, you mentioned you just had your scan on the 19th. Scan came back clean. So how does, I know you said you're dealing with neuropathy because of the oxyplatinum, which is a very effective drug, but does have those lingering side effects of neuropathy, unfortunately. What does life look like right now for you? Are you going back to work? I mean, well, let me ask you this question. Were you able to work during this time? I would imagine that would have probably been pretty difficult, but
I worked full time outside of treatment days through chemotherapy. And that just comes back to like, I feel like America issues. Like it was out of necessity. If I didn't, I would have gone bankrupt. I could have applied for FMLA, but the way it works, I don't know if it's like this in every field, but in the teacher world, you have to like have the leave. So like
yeah.
I would have been approved, but you have to have like the leave to get paid during it. Um, and my school system does allow like donated leave, but you have to be out for 4 weeks prior to that being able to kick in. Um, so I had literally just enough days because I've only been here for 2 years. I had just enough days to be able to take off for my treatment. And outside of that, I was at work every day. And I'm very grateful. I'm out of the classroom. I'm a math coach, which that was a blessing in itself as well, because I was a classroom teacher the year before. So my principal and my administration were so supportive. Like there were definitely days I had to go like take a nap in the nurse's office for like an hour and a half just to make it through the workday. But yeah, no, I worked full time outside of my treatment days, and I planned treatment purposely. I would go for in person on Thursday. And up until April, I was going to work on Friday with my
Um,
portable pump attached to me, just to save days. And it wasn't until I had treatment over my spring break and I got home that Thursday and, I didn't have to set an alarm the next day and I slept for 16 hours. And I am someone who's like normally up by like just natural body clock up by 6:30. So I was like, oh, and I recovered so much better that round that I was like, perhaps I should like maybe stop pushing myself to go to work on these Fridays. So then the remainder of the school year, I took off Fridays as well, just for my own sake. But I don't even think I realized how exhausted I was until July came and I was done like with treatment, or even June, because my last two treatments were in summer break. But like just being able to do nothing after treatment and not have to like push myself to go back to work. So I had a lot of people who were like praise. I'm like, I'm not a hero. Like it was literally out of financial necessity. I was like, it's not, I was not trying to like prove that how strong I was to anyone by working through chemo. It's just, as a teacher in America, was not in a financial position to like not work and pay my bills without a paycheck. You know, for 6 months. So yeah, I actually go back to work depending on whatever Debbie's doing outside tomorrow.
oh, wow.
Yeah. So we start early here in South Carolina because we get out earlier. So but yeah, so it's kind of I'm in this like mentally weird space because I'm a perfectionist by nature and I take a lot of like pride in whatever work I'm doing. Like I like to do whatever I'm doing to the best of my ability. So it's like obviously the second half of the school year, I feel which people were understanding, but I feel like I wasn't doing like the best at my job that I could have naturally but when you're out 2 days every 10 days, like, you're not going to be as effective at your job. So I feel like I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself to like go into this school year so like strong and like on my game, but then also knowing that like if while people were so understanding last year and my school is so great, I'm like, I'm not going to get that same level of like understanding going into this school year because again, if you've never been through it or you haven't personally like up close witnessed someone who's been through it, I don't think people understand how long this can still affect you post chemo and cancer. Um, so So it's like I'm excited to like get back to my like routine and get back to like something. There's so much in my life that's still not normal. So like at least that aspect being normal, I'm looking forward to. But I also am like preparing myself for it being like more challenging than I'm probably anticipating.
Yeah, you said something really powerful there, though. I mean, I think like, and not just pancreatic cancer, but this is like American society, maybe world society, actually. But I will just stay here in our own little four four walls of the USA right now. We don't need to venture out. um, I think we are so fixated on survival, like beating cancer, right? And then you have these survivors, and everyone thinks, oh, like your life goes back to what it was before. And no, like that's not, and that's something that and I know we mentioned this before we hit record, like this podcast is not about us, but the one thing I will say for us as we worry about what we do, I know we have tried to do more and more because um, survival, I think, looks a lot different for people. And I think that's something that's not talked about at all with cancer. Like, and I get it, like there's the seriousness and the main thought is always beating the cancer. But I don't think our society does a very good job of like working with cancer survivors to like guide them through the next phase of life, which is being that survivor and how that looks and what changes, like how do we adapt to those changes. I mean, you mentioned a very, the thing of dealing with neuropathy, like that changes every, like you said, like you're a runner. I mean, that's got, like, I know from talking to just survivors, like walking around, like that's challenging, right? Getting water out of the fridge is a challenge because of the neuropathy in your hands, right? Because of that, how that impacts that. Those little things, like think about it, like getting water out of a fridge or getting water out of a bottle or putting water into a bottle and walking are like basic concepts that we like take for granted. Like that some people, yeah, you beat this thing called cancer, but now you have to deal with these side effects maybe for the rest of your life or until something is figured out about them. And that's not just for pancreatic cancer. I mean, there's other cancers, right? I mean, there's so many. I mean, we haven't even talked about it for you, Holly, but I'm not sure digestively like how that looks now, or like just eating, like going back to like again, before cancer, during cancer, and then post. But back to my point here is I think our society as a whole is so fixated on surviving, beating the cancer, but then there's this whole population in the United States, and those numbers are growing because of advances in certain cancers of survivors, and we're pushing really hard here in our space to grow that survivor network and that survivability. But I don't think anyone's really focused on that afterlife.
No, and I would wholeheartedly agree because I've said it numerous times in my own journey that it's like when you're going through chemotherapy, you're literally just in survival mode. And it's like, even myself, like, while like I was like, yes, I need to take care of my mental health and like my emotional health. And I can talk a little bit about what I did with that, but it's like the physical aspect of it encompasses so much of it that it's like that is your main focus, that I feel like in terms of actually like fully processing like mentally and emotionally like what I've been through, like I wasn't even capable of doing that during chemotherapy because the physical toll that it was taking on me was so great that it's like I just got to like survive this and then I can like get to like the mental and emotional and like really process everything I've been through and start to heal from that aspect.
So powerful what you just said. I know I've got a couple questions here left for you, and one that I want to just from what you just said. So let's talk about that, like the mental aspect. I know you've brought up faith a bit. You said your dad's a pastor. Um, the obvious here, 35 years old, dealing with a cancer that, statistically, you can simply Google and nothing looks good. That's why we say stay off Google, but you went to Google. Um, I guess this is your opportunity to kind of share like what really worked for you if you're comfortable with that. Like what got you through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, like number one, my faith. I consider myself a Christian. But it was kind of one of those things where it's like rather this goes the way I want it to or it doesn't. I was like, I have like, I believe in an afterlife. And I was like, I believe I know where I'm going when this life ends. So it was almost like a hope that it's like, even if I'm like not okay here on earth, like I'm going to be okay in the long run. Which is it like, it sounds easier to say than it actually is to like process. And like I had said, even before my diagnosis, I kind of mentally prepared myself for anywhere from like it's a miracle to like you have 6 months to live. And something I feel like I've done really well in my life. I'm single, I'm not married. Dating is hard in present in present days. But I was like, when I was in my upper 20s, I was like, okay, I was like, I'm not getting married young. Like at this point, you have so many friends who got married like right out of college. It was like, I want to like do all the things I want to do with that time and like take full advantage of like my single years because being married with kids looks very different from being single. And like I mentioned before, I love to travel. So I've had a second job probably for the last like 7, 8 years at some sort of like something else I'm doing to like make travel money. So I like go on at least like one international trip, like spring break, winter break, and summer break, like every single year. Because I was like, when you have kids, I don't know that I want to take like a 2-year-old to Europe. Things like that. So it's like I really want to take advantage and like do these things while I can. And I had a lot of people, like I remember somebody once was like, you'd probably be like a millionaire when you retire if you weren't spending all this money like on travel. And I said it was like nobody's guaranteed to make it to retirement. I feel like that's another thing in America. And maybe it's from going to Europe a lot. I feel like American society is like built like we live to work, where a lot of other cultures operate more from like a we work to live aspect. And I feel like I've kind of tried to adopt that in my own life where I'm like, not that I thought I was going to get cancer or die young or anything, but I was like, nobody is guaranteed. Like I could get in my car today and like die in a car crash on my way to the grocery store. Like nobody is guaranteed tomorrow. So I've just tried to always take advantage of my time while I had it. So when processing, especially like getting diagnosed with cancer at 35, I'm like, I asked myself the question. I was like, before getting diagnosed, I was like, going into surgery, I was like, if I'm told I have 6 months to live, like, am I going to look back and like regret the way I lived my life? Am I going to be like, oh, I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd done this. And naturally, like, there's things I would go back and do differently. I think that's just human nature that we all have made mistakes, done things that were like, oh, I wish I like could go back and redo that. But I was like, I felt like if I had been told I was terminal, that I like made the most of my time in my 35 years, like trying to live my life in a way that I really love. So I think that kind of helped me through it all is that I was like, I've lived a good life while I've been here. But then on the flip side of that, and something nobody deserves to get cancer, young or old, but there is a difference in getting diagnosed as young. And I feel like it's hard to talk about because I feel like it's easy for people to confuse it as like, oh, like I think nobody deserves to get cancer. But when you get cancer later in life, you've lived so much of life. You've experienced so many things. We're getting diagnosed young. It's like one of the hardest things for me was I felt like a giant pause button just like got slapped on my life. Um, so it's like I did because I struggle with anxiety just in general. And it's like I had like a full blown panic attack at some point during chemo, and it was just like I was like, have I like failed myself, like not putting like more because I do want like marriage and kids and things, but I'm also someone who's like not willing to just like settle for a relationship that I don't think is like what I would actually want because if I get married, it's forever. I'm not willing to like settle with someone just for the sake of having someone. But it's like I had friends get engaged, get married, have babies, get pregnant, like through the like best friends of mine through the course of like chemo. And that was like a really like hard thing to navigate because it's like on one hand I'm like so overwhelmingly like happy for my friends and like celebrating them, but then on the flip side being like, at what point do I get back to living and like I get to have things? It's like I don't want to say like I have like nothing to live for, but it's like when you're in treatment, it's like that's your whole life. Your whole life revolves around it. So that was like a really hard thing to navigate. So something like that helped me with my mental health was like allowing myself to feel those feelings, but without living in them. I went through some stuff in my 20s and I feel like I learned a lot about my like emotional and like mental health. And I had a lot of situations in my 20s that I like lived in my feelings and it didn't serve me whatsoever. Like had to go on antidepressants. And I was like, I can't like get through the physical aspect of this if I'm not like doing well, like mentally and emotionally. So one thing that really helped me, I kind of had to like give myself some tough love, but it's like, okay, like we need to spend this day in bed crying because life sucks. This sucks. We're going to do that. But then like tomorrow we're going to get up. It's not going to be 2 days. It's not going to be 3 days. Like tomorrow we're going to get up and we're going to like do something, whether it was going to the beach for sunrise, or like going for a run. I mentioned I did run like through chemo because running has always been like my mental like outlet, how I like get out my frustration, like going for a run or going for a walk or just like doing something I enjoy, and finding a balance between the two of those. I'm very grateful to live near the beach. Every single chemo session, I went down to the beach for sunrise before going to chemotherapy just to kind of get myself like in a mentally good aspect. And I would just be like thinking and praying, and I'd be like, it's all going to be okay, like mentally preparing myself for the experience. But I feel like ultimately trying to find things that make you feel normal in like this severely abnormal experience and like having control of the things you can control really, really helped me to at least like survive through like the mental and emotional. And again, that's a lot easier said than done. And like I said, I had a lot of experiences in my 20s that I feel like if I'd gotten cancer in my 20s, I would not have handled it as well as I did in my 30s. But I had a lot of like living experience that I feel like helped me learn how to like process my emotions better, to help serve me better through this experience.
It's powerful stuff. I think, I mean, you're young. You mentioned a couple things that have happened to you earlier in life that prepared you for, this journey. And I think oftentimes as the host here on the podcast, I ask certain questions, and they're not specific questions, they're just questions in the conversation. It's not like this is done purposely. But I guess as the listener, and maybe our audience listening at home, just caught something very powerful, Holly, that, like you go through these things, like you said, like in your 20s, like if you'd gotten this cancer in your 20s, you wouldn't be able to handle it the way you did now in your 30s because of the things you went through in your 20s. So as we go through these things in our life, we don't necessarily understand why we're going through them, right? But then when something like pancreatic cancer comes knocking on our door and we're able to get through that journey because of the experiences we had prior to, and like you said, like if you didn't, if you had it in your 20s, you wouldn't have probably the same outcome just because you didn't go through that. And I think it's just so powerful, right? Because I mean, I believe faith is a big part of all our lives. And I'm not here to preach, and I'm not here to tell you where to go, but I can tell you, going on over 300 episodes, and half of those episodes have been with people that have gone through this journey. The ones that have done it better than others have had faith by their side. Now, what faith that is, I'm not here to tell you to do that. But I think there's something powerful in that. The other piece, and I've got a couple questions here left for you, then we're going to share where our audience can connect. But, you mentioned, which is exercise, and you mentioned running. And so have you looked, here's my question. Well, there's two questions. One, first part is, have you ever thought like, hey, because you were, I know you mentioned this a little bit, because you were in marathon shape, that determined this outcome. But then also two, let's be honest, like we're two runners here. I've run 10 marathons. I don't know, and I'm not bragging. I was never a runner until I started Project Purple, and I freaking hated running. I still kind of hate running. I mean, running does suck, right? Like running 20 miles sucks. Running 26.2 sucks. Like there's no fun about it. Do you ever like, so the first part is, do you ever think about like the running being trained, at that level, which, there's training involved, and just being on your feet for that long, not only mentally but more so physical here, helped you get through this? And then two, that suck, like whether it's the chafing, everything that we deal with on those long runs, right? It just sucks. Your legs are shot. You can't move for 3 days. After the marathon, it's always, what's that analogy is like, oh, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks. You get through the finish line, you get the medal. Oh, that sucked. And then the next day you're signing up for that next marathon, right? But so do you ever look at that again from like experiences like, wow, like if I could do this, which literally sucks, I can do anything.
Oh yeah. I mean, marathon training definitely like builds perseverance. Like you don't know. I mean, I remember in the fall, like I was hanging out with some friends. It's like, all right, well, like I gotta go run. And they were like the phrase or like literally, I'm like, no, like literally, I've got to like go run like 5 miles tonight.
Yeah.
I mean, there were days I got up and would run 10 miles before going to work, like in the morning. Like I was very regiment with my training schedule. But yeah, no, it definitely, one thing I've always loved running, and I feel like this has probably come out a little bit in this podcast. I'm convinced as a teacher that I have undiagnosed ADHD. I feel like it's so easy, like when you say ADHD, that you think like it's little boys and like hyperactivity, like physically. But for me, it's my mind. Like my mind is everywhere all the time. And I feel like if you've been listening to this, even sometimes I'm like, oh God, I was like, I've been all over the place. But for me, I always say I love running because while it sucks, it's like I quite literally cannot think while I'm running. Like I will like try to be like going over a to-do list, or I'll like try praying. Or I'm like, and within like 5 minutes, like cannot consistently like think during running. And that's where I've always loved it, because it's like I can shut my mind. This is like the one thing. I mean, granted, I could probably go to a doctor and get diagnosed and get on like Adderall or something if I really wanted to. But I'm like, I've made it this far in life. I think I'm okay. I was good at school, so like I think we're doing okay. But it's like it's the one thing where I'm like, I can actually like shut my mind off. So it's like, yeah, like running 20 miles sucked, but it's like, but 3 hours where like I didn't have like all the thoughts like bouncing around in my head. Like that's so nice. Um, so yeah, no, it definitely, I attribute, because even like surgery, like my surgeon was like, we've never seen someone bounce after. I probably could have gone, I was recovering over my winter break, but I probably would have, if I was in work, gone back to work after a week, because I like physically felt, I still had like some abdominal pain, but like for the most part, like physically felt okay. I was like going for like 2 3 mile walks like 4 or 5 days after surgery. Like, and I'm the queen of pushing myself too hard sometimes. That's something I had to learn during chemo as well, that I'm like, it's okay to like take a beat and like rest. Like we don't have to push ourselves all the time. But I definitely think being in that such good shape going into surgery and going into chemo, and even because I want to say like a month between being recovered from, no, not even a month. I had 2 weeks. I had like hit the month mark post surgery, which was when I was cleared to run again before I started chemo. And like the day I was cleared by my surgeon, I like went out for a run, because it was like, I want to be able to do this during chemo, because I know this is going to be a lot for me. And this is like my mental outlet and how I get like my stress and frustration out. So up until, and another reason I haven't been running as much, which I feel like has probably made my neuropathy a little worse, is uh, the hair aspect. It's never just hair. Like the people mean well with the things they say to cancer patients, but the number of times it's like, well, hair will grow back. And I'm like, it's not just hair. It's another thing that like cancer is taking from me on top of the like grocery list of things that have been taken. Like it's never just about the hair. But something I found as it like summer weather came in was like the heat and humidity outside was making my hair shed like rapidly. So I wasn't running as much towards the end of chemo in like an effort to keep as much hair on my head as possible. Because I've probably lost, I know like if you're looking at me, it's like, oh, you have like a head full of hair. And it's like, I've probably lost like half of my hair. I can manipulate it so like you can't see my scalp. But like when I get out of the shower, I'm like, I look like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. So it's been hard. But yeah, no, I definitely think like just that training and learning to kind of like push through the suck
Yeah.
kind of helped prepare me for this journey with cancer and chemotherapy.
Powerful. Second to last question here. Again, loaded question, no right or wrong here. I know you've mentioned a lot of great things here, but advice for maybe someone on the other side that's listening to this, maybe they're in their 30s and they just got diagnosed, going through what you've gone through and everything you've experienced. What are some things that you would tell them, to do as, someone who's gone through it over the last, almost a year?
Um, so biggest thing is find something that gives you hope. I mentioned for me, my faith was a big part of that, but I also respect that a lot of people are not religious and that's okay. But like finding something, rather it's a loved one that you have that you want to stick around for and be around for, or something you love doing, like find something that gives you hope and cling to that. And then just finding ways to find joy within this experience, which is, again, a lot easier said than done because I feel like it's so easy to get wrapped up in like the emotions that come along with this journey. But rather, it's reading a book, going and getting a cup of coffee, going to your favorite restaurant, like finding things that like kind of like revive your soul through the process of this. And the things that you can keep normal, like do that as much as it gets sucked to work full time, which again, if you are physically not capable, I am not telling anyone to push themselves to go to work full time because it sucked. But I do think that like that helped me a lot through chemo, that I wasn't just sitting at home. So if you're physically capable, whatever it is that you like to do, just like finding things that you still enjoy to do, finding joy in the little aspects and finding something that like gives you hope through the end of this. Cause I feel like without that, it's like you got to find a reason to fight. You got to have a reason, whether it's for yourself or for someone else. You got to find a reason to fight through this and cling to that.
I love it. Last question here, and again, this is a loaded question, no right or wrong. Given what you've gone through, your experience, how do you define the term pancreatic cancer? What's Holly's definition of it?
Oh, oh my gosh, that is a loaded question. Uh, I feel like again, like I said, I filter through. I feel like the first thought that comes to mind is like bane to my existence. But you know, it's a learning experience. Um, as much as it sucked, as awful and as terrifying and as hard as it was, and will continue to be, because, like I mentioned, side effects, yes, but I have things like my fertility is now in question. And as someone who wants to be a mom, that's like a really hard pill um, to swallow. So it's like, while pancreatic cancer has like taken so much from me, I feel like it's also I had a good outlook on life, but I feel like it's really solidified, like not ever taking anything, anyone, like any moment for granted. And, just kind of in general to people who might be watching this, that it's like, do that thing you want to do. Rather, it's like, quit your job, move to a new city, like, tell that person you love them or leave them if you're unhappy, like go to that country, like book the trip, like whatever it is that you're finding like reasons to like put off, to not do that. Because I feel like it just really solidified that it's like we have no idea what's going to happen in life. um So it's really important to take advantage of the time that's given to you while it's given. So it's like, while this experience sucked, and while I pray every day that it doesn't reoccur and that I never have to go through this again, um, I feel like it's given me a very different outlook on life that I'm very grateful for.
Powerful stuff, Holly. For our audience listening and watching, if there's a place, I know you mentioned TikTok where they can connect. Is TikTok the best place for our audience at large to connect with you?
Yeah, and it's been really cool because I had a video that I had made about my diagnosis that went viral. So the amount of like random DMs I've gotten from people with like questions, but it's like I don't mind because and maybe it's the educator in me, but it's like, again, if sharing my story and putting it out there and sharing what I've been through helps even like one person detect their pancreatic cancer early, then that's worth it to me. So yeah, my TikTok is H Shawyer, literally like as in Holly, and then my last name, so HSHAWYER. I respond to all my DMs. I try, sometimes comments get a little overwhelming because especially I feel bad. Like I'll have to like, thankfully they've done something where you can filter and just see comments. So it's easier to catch a lot of them, but just answering any questions that I can. I mean, obviously I'm not a medical professional, but I'm happy to answer any questions, share any insight. I've done a lot of that. So going through my videos, people might find some information that they might find helpful, but I just try, I've tried to be as like real and raw with my journey, sharing both like the good and the ugly, throughout it. And also just like being a place that it's like you're not alone, like whatever you're feeling, like somebody else is out there feeling it too. So I've tried to make my page a place where it's like this is a safe space for you to cry, scream, vent, whatever you need to do. Just like know I've been there too, regardless of how positive I might sound. I've definitely like shared the negative on there as well. So yeah.
I love it. I just went to TikTok and followed you. So now you got 14,000.9. So let's
Which
see.
is insane to me.
Let's get you over to 15.
I like was looking at that the other day. I was like, I don't know why 15,000 people like care, but it's insane to me. Again, because I started posting on TikTok just as a way to keep myself accountable for like running, because it was like nobody's ever going to see this. So the fact that like 15,000 people almost have like come alongside, I'm just like, that's wild, but also like so cool. Because again, if I can help one of those 15,000, then it's
Worth it.
worth it.
Awesome. Holly, thank you for being a guest and for allowing us to share your journey here on the Project Purple podcast. It's been our honor.
Yeah, it's so great meeting you and chatting with you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. If you like today's episode, feel free to share this episode. Make sure you follow us wherever you listen to the podcast. That's a wrap of another episode of the Project Purple podcast. And next time, please be safe and thanks for listening.